We begin the day with Trump's tariff threats and the political consequences. Recently, when U.S. President Donald Trump imposed and then suspended tariffs on all Canadian products, it got many there thinking, with friends like that, who needs enemies, would have seemed fanciful. It ran with the headline, Donald Trump drives a wedge between Canada and the U.S. with a trade war. Could we join the EU?
Frankly, Canada has had enough. For decades, it stood by the United States as its closest economic partner, trusting in a stable alliance. But now, everything is changing and it's happening fast. Trump's tariffs, hitting Canada with a brutal 25% tax on exports, have pushed the country to the edge. And what happens next? It could change history, because Canada isn't just fighting back, it's looking for the exit door. And if this goes the way it's heading, the U.S. could wake up to a shocking new reality, a world where Canada no longer needs America.
And it's not only the Toronto Star. The Economist has been pondering why Canada should join the EU. Europe needs space and resources. Canada needs people. Let's deal. Well, leading voices in the European Union have also been getting behind it. European Parliament member Guy Verhofstadt posting on X, "We in Europe remember that Canadians died to liberate our continent. In the face of Trump's madness, the EU stands with Canada now. There is no reason why EU membership should be off."
All it took was one move from Donald Trump, a decision that could go down as one of the biggest miscalculations in U.S. trade history.
It is the news the Canadian government and Canadian businesses did not want to hear. U.S. President Donald Trump confirming late this afternoon that he plans to slap 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican products beginning on Saturday.
We'll be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a number of reasons. Number one is the people that have poured into our country so horribly and so much. Number two are the drugs, fentanyl, and everything else that have come into the country. And number three are the massive subsidies that we're giving to Canada and to Mexico in the form of deficits. And I'll be putting the tariff of 25% on Canada and separately 25% on Mexico. And we will really have to do that because we have very big deficits with those countries. Those tariffs may or may not rise.
His proposed 25% tariff included an additional 10% tax on energy exports. This wasn't just a slap in the face to Canada. It was a declaration of economic war.
Up for Ukraine is also standing up for the international rules-based order that protects us all and has led to extraordinary prosperity these past 8 decades. This is a moment for all of us to continue to stand together, and as friends and partners, that's exactly what we will always do. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci.
We discuss tariffs?
We're going to discuss all sorts.
Would Canada be better as the 28th EU member state or the US?
For years, the U.S. and Canada worked together under trade agreements that benefited both sides. But Trump's new tariffs threatened to destroy billions of dollars in Canadian exports, hitting industries like steel, aluminum, and energy the hardest. And here's where things go completely off the rails. Canada isn't just going to sit back and take it.
EU, is it possible for Canada to become the 28th member of the European Union? And is that what Europe wants?
So it's not impossible, has been the response that I've had from EU officials after asking that question. It might have seemed a little bit sort of glib that I asked him whether it would be better for Canada to be the 28th EU member or the 51st state of the United States. But it really belies a pretty important discussion, which is where does Canada see itself in its place in the world related to the United States and related to the European Union. It was very clear from Trudeau's arrival here in Brussels that they feel very warmly towards the EU. Now, the officials that I've spoken to since say that basically it wouldn't be completely impossible for Canada to decide to submit an application to be an EU member state. That while EU member states have to be, it says in the text, a European country, that there is actually no definition of what a European country is in that context, so therefore it wouldn't be completely impossible.
If Trump thought Canada would quietly accept the punishment, he was wrong. Instead, Canada is looking for the exit door, and it may have already found it. Right now, something unthinkable is being discussed. Canada could leave its trade partnership with the US and join the European Union instead. Sounds crazy, right? A few years ago it would have been, but not anymore. And if this happens, it could be one of the most significant shifts in global trade in decades. Trump's tariffs have forced Canada to rethink its entire economic future. For years, it relied on US markets, assuming the partnership was stable. But now, Canada is expanding its trade relationships at a rapid pace. At the center of this strategy is a growing alliance with the European Union.
A tongue-in-cheek look at Canada joining the EU, but Canadians, they must be reflecting on their place in the world given what has happened over the past couple of weeks.
Oh, yes, and reflecting very much upon the nature of our relationship with our largest trading partner. I mean, it's important to understand that Canada exports something north of 75% of our goods and services to our neighbor to the south. But the recent events with Mr. Trump musing about 51st states, threatening tariffs, already imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum, it's caused a lot of self-reflection in Canada about how much this nation relies on exports to the United States for a variety of different ways. And it caused a lot of self-reflection within the country about trading within Canada, because oddly enough, there are substantial
Canada and the EU already have a massive trade agreement in place called CETA, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. And here's the wild part. Trade between Canada and the EU has skyrocketed by 65% since 2017, reaching over $100 billion. That's right, while Trump is slamming the door shut on Canada, Europe is rolling out the red carpet. European officials are openly discussing deeper economic ties with Canada, even hinting at full EU membership. And if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear this. Some European leaders are already calling Canada Europe's closest partner outside the continent.
Comprehensive and so detailed in terms of who's the most vulnerable. Clearly, the entire country would be affected. But let's talk about that. How do you go about measuring which cities are more vulnerable than others?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the conversation really has been at the national and provincial level. You know, the Canadian Chamber has resources for policymakers, businesses, and Canadians to better understand the Canada-US relationship. We've modeled tariffs at 25%, the impacts on the US and Canadian economy, as well as the Canada-US trade tracker, which allows you to get into the nitty-gritty detail in terms of products and trade between states and provinces. You know, as you mentioned, the tariff exposure index really takes into account two components. One of them is export intensity for cities across the country. So that's how much of their goods exports are headed to the United States as a share of their local economy.
If Canada fully shifts toward the EU, it would be one of the biggest economic divorces in modern history. And it wouldn't just hurt Canada. It would be a major blow to the US economy as well. And let's also be clear, Trump's tariffs are not just hurting Canada. They're hurting American businesses too. And here's why.
I think it's pretty ridiculous and a slap in the face to our allies. Like, you guys have our back, you stimulate our economy.
It might cost us more in the long run, you know, down here. And he has a lot of different things he's doing and may come back to bite him. All of us, you never know.
We got to do what we got to do. I mean, we've been taken advantage of for too long, and I believe in Trump.
I don't know. He's saying it's to reduce drugs and things across the border, but I don't buy that really. So
Canada is the largest supplier of steel and aluminum to the U.S., providing materials that are essential for American industries like defense, shipbuilding, and car manufacturing. Last year alone, Canada exported $4.4 billion worth of steel and aluminum to the U.S. That's a massive number. But thanks to Trump's tariffs, American companies will now have to pay much higher prices for these critical materials.
Actually, just another threat from Donald Trump, because he has said this before. He said this before in the Oval Office last week, in the day of the inauguration. He talked about that February 1st date. That was the first time we had heard that date floated. Now it's very much looking like Saturday is the day those tariffs are going to take effect.
The Trudeau government has said all along that it's ready to respond with retaliatory tariffs on American imports if necessary. The first round is reportedly worth about $37 billion. A second, if needed, is reportedly worth $110 billion. It's not clear if oil exports from Alberta would be included, but the PM has repeatedly said all options are on the table.
And that's just the beginning. Because as costs go up, jobs start disappearing. The U.S. auto industry, which relies heavily on Canadian materials, could see factories closing and thousands of workers losing their jobs. And if you think American consumers are safe, think again. Higher prices for steel and aluminum mean higher prices for cars, appliances, and even canned goods. In other words, Trump's tariffs are not just hurting Canada, they're hurting everyday Americans too.
Stephen Polaz is the former governor of the Bank of Canada. He now serves as a special advisor at Osler Law Firm, and he's with me live in studio. Hi, nice to see you.
Pleasure.
I appreciate you making the time. I wanted to start off, I think, with what's on a lot of Canadians' minds, which is, yes, we escaped this the application of these tariffs for seemingly 30 days, but the threat has not dissipated entirely.
Yeah.
If they were to be applied in the manner that Trump had threatened, I obviously understand it depends on the duration of the application, but in general, how bad would it be for the economy?
Pretty bad. We could probably do no better than those numbers the Bank of Canada circulated in their analysis, but others have done similar analyses. And this sort of cluster in around 5% pay cut for the economy as a whole. It's pretty significant stuff. Takes 2 years for it to reach that point. But I think the important thing to take away from that is it's permanent. It kind of sounds like the economy slows down for a couple of years. It can, but you never make up the 5% that you lost. And so that would be a permanent.
Faced with these economic attacks, Canada isn't waiting around for things to get worse. It's already expanding its trade partnerships beyond the U.S., looking for new markets to reduce its dependence on American business. Canada has struck trade deals with Indonesia and Ecuador. It's expanding its reach in the Indo-Pacific region, focusing on Australia, Singapore, and Brunei. It has set a goal to increase non-U.S. exports by 50% by 2025. This is a clear warning sign for the U.S. Canada is not afraid to move on. If Trump's administration continues down this path, America could permanently lose its most stable and reliable trade partner. And that's not just bad for Canada, that's bad for the U.S. economy too. And here's where it gets even crazier. Canada isn't alone in this fight.
The honest truth, Brent, is yes, probably. It will be more aligned with the EU's values, which is the complications for many countries when they try and join the EU. You mentioned Turkey, decades-long process, which is completely frozen now to become an EU member country. We saw Morocco once apply. They were deemed to be too African, down on the African continent, not a European country. But also the politics are nowhere near aligned to the European Union's. In order to join the European Union, what a country has to do is to apply for a membership status, get candidate status, and then it has to open 35 chapters, they're called. Things like, is your justice system in line with the EU's justice system? Are your regulations on the phytosanitary and food regulations in line with the European Union? Will you fit into the single market? There's 35 of them. You have to open them and then close them. And some of those chapters are opened and closed very quickly with countries that want to.
The European Union is also furious over Trump's tariffs, and they're not staying silent. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called Trump's trade policies unjustified and promised that the EU will take action. French President Emmanuel Macron warned that Europe will not sit back and let U.S. tariffs damage its economy. European leaders are already discussing retaliatory tariffs on American goods, just like they did during Trump's first term. And if Canada and the EU fully align their trade policies, the U.S. could find itself increasingly isolated on the global stage.
I'm in a somewhat uncomfortable position because it's not my job and it's not my inclination. You know me long enough to know that I don't represent President Trump in Canada. I don't represent anyone in Canada anymore. As president, he's entitled to a lot of room in how he pursues the policies and objectives that he's trying to pursue. However, there is a matter of tone and respect that I subscribe to, that Joe Biden subscribed to. Frankly, this isn't a partisan issue because I think multiple presidents of both parties have subscribed to a theory that you treat your friends like friends and you treat them with respect. And I don't think the constant, almost heckling of Canada as the solution to this problem is for Canada just to become the 51st state is very respectful.
So where does this all lead? Right now, two possible futures are unfolding. One dot is that the U.S. reverses course and negotiates with Canada and the EU, preventing a full-scale trade war. Two, Canada continues pulling away from the U.S., strengthening ties with Europe, and permanently altering the global balance of economic power. But let's be real, Trump's administration doesn't like backing down. If things continue as they are, we could see the most dramatic reorganization of trade in North America's history. Now you might be asking, what's the bottom line? Is this the end of U.S.-Canada trade relations?
I think I quibble with any attempted exercise of foreign policy that doesn't show proper respect to other countries, any other countries, let alone a country like Canada that has a 150-year plus relationship of friendship and allyship and partnership. On the other hand, it's hard for me to get exercised about this because Canada's made quite clear that it has no interest in becoming the 51st state. The United States has no authority to annex Canada or to make...
Trump's aggressive trade policies have pushed Canada into the arms of Europe. And once those ties are fully established, there may be no going back. So, here's the big question. Will Trump's trade war backfire? If the U.S. keeps pushing its allies away, it may wake up one day and find itself standing alone. And the price of that? It could be far higher than anyone ever expected. What do you make of these? Kindly let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.